This is how the MCU Spider-Man should have been, and now I gotta talk about it. Hey there, this is your Matt Dude with my Thomas Hands, Doomer with another video, and today I'll talk about your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man and how unexpectedly good this show ended up being, and it ended up being really good. Now, that doesn't mean the show is perfect. There are still things that I am not a huge fan of, mainly the CGI models they use for it. Now, I'm not saying the animation's bad. The animation can be really good, especially when Peter's web swinging. But when it's just still or when there's barely any motion, it does look a little funky. Now, before I continue, this video does contain spoilers for the entire show. So if you haven't watched the show in its entirety or care about spoilers, please go watch the show. If you were a Spider-Man fan, you will most likely like this. But if you don't care about spoilers or have watched the entire show, let's continue with everything I have to say. Now, when I first heard this show was coming out, I was not against it, but I wasn't really for it, mainly because they had said that this show was going to be Peter before he got recruited to Civil War, and I'm like, it'd be okay. But then they said, oh, no, that's not what the show's about anymore. Now it's going to be about Peter in an alternate universe and how this version of Peter, works. Again, I'm not a huge fan, so I was not 100% on the show. But then we got nothing, and then I was kind of like, okay, I guess the show's not happening anymore. And that was that. But then when leaks were showing up, I was like, I don't like this at all. And then the actual trailer came out. I was not a fan of CGI. Like I said, I'm not a fan of the models. They can look weird. And in the trailer, the movement also looked janky. Now, I know some people are saying that, oh, this animation is like a much better version of the MTV new animated Spider-Man show. I'm going to be very honest. I still think that looks better to this day. Don't hate me. But I was not really a fan of what they were doing with this trailer. The only thing I found really cool was the theme song. This theme song had no right to be as good as it was.
There we go, there we go, there we go again. Swinging through the city so fast you could barely notice him. Need my city, you need me. Taking off the mask, I know what you see. Know you want a neighbor like me. Just a young man cleaning up the streets. Know you want a neighbor like me.
But because I wasn't excited, I had to hype myself up to why I wanted to watch the show. I basically had to say and make an entire video on the fact that, oh, maybe this show is a what if Peter wasn't recruited by Iron Man and was recruited by Norman Osborn. And technically I am right, but also no, if that makes sense. And to be honest, I am still not a big fan of the first two episodes. They do feel like the weakest episodes in this show, which is not a good thing because this is supposed to be your introduction to the show. But I held on and I kept watching, and my mediocre feeling about the show went to extreme excitement by the end. And I think it's because of the good writing. They made you feel for every character they put focus on. Like in this version, they made Peter's friend Nico, who is from the Runaways. It's a team that I have heard of, but don't really know too much about. But the way they made her in the show was so fun, very cool. And honestly, for a while, I thought they would end up together. But, they clearly did the whole, they're just friends. And that's cool. And then in this version, they also added Pearl, who apparently is also a super-powered hero in the comics that I have never heard of until this show came out. And I was like, okay. And these aren't normally Peter characters. They aren't Spider-Man characters. But the way they made them in the show made you care about them so much. And the best character I feel like is in the show is Lonnie Lincoln, Tombstone. Yes, they did the whole thing where they made him a younger character so he can fit into this new younger Peter's world. And normally I'm like, oh, why do they have to do that? But I honestly love this version because he's not the stereotypical jock as they try to portray in the show. He is actually someone who's smart, who actually wants to be friends with Peter, and Peter being very good friends with him. And that was refreshing. That he does not an evil villain from the beginning. He actually wants to learn. He wants to get into, football. And what got him into being in a gang and then going into the road to being Tombstone is because of a stupid decision of his brother that caused him to, have to switch places, which I found that so sad. But then after that, you knew that this guy was going to be a villain that Spider-Man had to fight. But not yet. But because they made everyone so fleshed out, it made the world feel lived in. Now, one thing I was very worried about was the fact that they were making Norman Osborn the mentor of Peter Parker, mainly because of how they did it with Tony Stark and Peter in the MCU, and that was not fun. But that's where I feel like this was supposed to be how the MCU should have shown Spider-Man if it wasn't for Sony's intervention a lot of the time. Because they made it that in this one, Norm Osborn went after Peter because he saved Harry. A very Spider-Man thing to do. But one thing I really like that really differentiates itself from MCU is that Peter actively refuses help by Norman Osborn because he feels like it's his responsibility to do it alone, because he's willing to get hurt, but he does not want anyone else to get hurt. Not because he's like, oh, I can do it myself. No, it's out of an actual responsibility of the people. And I found that so nice. And I like the fact that the only reason why Peter decided to, get help from Norman was because he was getting his butt kicked, and Norman hacked into his goggles and basically coached him in how to be a hero. And it's cool because it wasn't Peter's choice to do that. It was like, hey, I'm in a problem. Maybe I do need help. And that was a good way to say it. But one thing's interesting is because Norman had, obviously tried to get Peter on his side, he obviously wants to change him. And we see that by him having 3 suits, which I was extremely worried about, because when the show was first announced, they had showed Peter having so many different suits. It showed that he was going to have, the normal Spider-Man suit. It showed him that he was going to have the Prodigy suit, the Dust suit, the Hornet suit, and the Future Foundation suit. I'm like, oh my god, that's a lot of suits. How are they going to bring it in? But in here, they actually did it pretty smart by showing that Norman does not understand what Spider-Man is supposed to be. By saying, why did you even choose to be Spider-Man? And Peter's like, well, I got bit by a spider, so it only made sense that I would be Spider-Man. And I like that Norman's like, maybe you gotta broaden your horizon. Be better, be different. It's more marketable. Which I find funny because in each individual suit, it shows that being marketable, being a corporate person is not a good idea, because Peter gets either hurt in the suit or doesn't understand how the weaponry works or gets screamed by a girl, which I found hilarious that they did an homage to the original Spider-Man 2 game where the little girl lost a balloon, sounding very much like the one in the game.
Oh no, my balloon! Wait up. Balloon, come back!
And then getting her balloon by quote-unquote Dusk, and it shows that Norman does not understand what Spider-Man's supposed to be. As they show, they give him what they call in the show, the Oscorp suit, which this is where I get a little weirded out, because it's called the Oscorp suit, but a lot of people know this as the Future Foundation suit. Now, I understand the story reason on why they kept it in this show and why they want to do it. It's because they show, Norman doesn't understand what Spider-Man's supposed to be, so he gives him a very bare bones idea of what Spider-Man's supposed to be. It's big eyes and then the big spiders. That's good. It's good, simple. But I have a problem that now people are going to assume that this suit came from this show and wasn't from the comics. I don't know. That's a big one for me. But for the show, I understand what it's for. Because when he ditched that white and black suit and got his red and blue, it felt so earned. Because it wasn't something that was just given to him. He drew it, and his friend Harry made the suit for him. And that felt so nice and heartwarming. Now, I wasn't 100% sure how I felt about the suit itself, mainly because they just reused the back logo as the front logo, just tiny. But watching it throughout this show and throughout the scenes he's wearing it, it weirdly works for him. I don't know why, but it does. Now, this does get me into a criticism, not of the show itself, but what has been happening a lot for Spider-Man. The fact that it feels like Spider-Man has to earn his red and blues than just having it, because, he's a good sewer. It feels weird for me because it doesn't seem like other heroes have to really go to that standard. But why does Spider-Man have this legacy to live up to costume-wise, when he's supposed to be the one that's broke and actually is the one that created himself? I don't know why. It just always felt kind of weird. And I'm also weirded out that, it's also a tech-based suit, kind of. But here in this show, it makes sense, and it feels a lot more earned than the MCU. Now, when it comes to the villains, I really love what they did with them, because they didn't just give us, big name ones. They gave us ones that are more obscure, like the Unicorn, Speed Demon, and Tarantula. And then the big name ones, like Chameleon and Dr. Otto Octavius. I love this version of Dr. Octavius and his sass. Yes, in normal cases, Dr. Octavius gets his craziness from the arms being fused to his body, but I'm okay with this change of this guy just being a weapons dealer, because it still kind of goes with how egocentric Octavius is, and especially with his rivalry with Norman, it feels like there's so much more there, and it makes you excited for what's next, which does eventually get me excited. And he is going to get his arms most likely in season 2, so that is nice. Now, I really like this version of Scorpion because he tied into Peter and Lonnie's progression, because he basically got Lonnie to be more entwined into the 1/10 gang because he saved the boss, while Peter got his shit rocked by Scorpion. And at the end, when they both had to fight him, and Lonnie had to be the one to reel Spider-Man in from actually ending him because of what Norman said, which I want to talk about that in a little bit. But I like that Scorpion became a big threat for both and kind of caused Lonnie to get his powers, kind of. Also, this suit was so cool. I like how they were able to make the original version of Scorpion's suit look cool, because I'm not usually a fan of the helmet he has, but here it makes him look like Hannibal Lecter, but Scorpion. And I don't know why, I really like that. But another thing that I have to give this props for more than the MCU is how they were actually able to incorporate cameos of actual Marvel characters that were never really like done well or at all shown in Peter's time in the MCU. Like, I love the fact that they basically had a cameo of Charlie Cox's Daredevil. He voiced him in the show, and he had a story reason to be there. I was worried because of those images that we saw way back when, that what would be the reason of having him there? But they gave him a nice reason for him being there as someone to basically tell Peter how corrupt Norman Osborn is, and that is nice. I liked that we got to see Iron Man as just someone who arrests or who stops Dr. Octopus in his tracks, and I'm like, that is nice. We don't see a lot of him, and I love that it's just that. And I like how this is how you can do world building right, keeping Spider-Man in New York while the rest of the world is still happening, because technically this universe is MCU adjacent, by how I said that some things align while also being somewhat different, because this world still had the Sokovia Accords happen, and that's what I mean. I was kind of right that this is a what if Peter never went into Civil War or recruited by Iron Man. That was cool because everything still happened because everyone else out there, but who's going to save New York? And that's Peter. He is usually that one-man army. I guess not really in the show because, he's got help. But even then, he has very minimal help right now, and he's still the one getting hurt. So I find that really, really cool. And he basically stops working with Norman Osborn at the end because of the fact that Norman was being manipulative and took ideas from a bunch of kids that were part of a program that he made to find Spider-Man and basically used them to create a giant portal, and a lot of them were not 100% with it. And one thing that I found really interesting is that that's how we got the symbiote, and also bringing in Doctor Strange. One thing that I really liked was how they full circles on Peter's origin, and it confused the hell out of me at the same time. Because in this version, in the beginning of the show, it showed Peter getting bit by a spider, but also Doctor Strange causing a lot of damage from a symbiote that was shown, right? But it turns out this was a time loop, because by the end of the show, we see Peter fighting that symbiote with Doctor Strange there because of some timey-wimey stuff going on, where Doctor Strange goes in the portal with the monster and goes back in time to cause that accident with Peter. Norman was creating a spider from Peter's DNA, but then that also became Peter's origin, which, to be honest, when I saw that happen, like, in the first couple episodes, I genuinely thought that this Peter was never supposed to be Spider-Man. But then when this became a whole turnaround, I got more confused. Because when Norman had made all those spiders, I thought, okay, maybe someone else is going to be Spider-Man. Maybe Miles is going to be Spider-Man. And I don't want that because, this is a new Spider-Man. I don't want that. And technically that's not what happened. But by the fact that they confirmed that they're adding Gwen Stacy for the next season as Spider-Gwen or whatever, I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm giving out hope because I really like what they did in this show, but I don't want other heroes to outshine them, which is why I really like this season, because they kept other heroes at a minimum while also still giving us what we wanted. But now if you notice, I haven't really mentioned Peter himself completely. That's because he is the weirdest case when it comes to what I like about the show. I like that he acts like Spider-Man. I love that he actually is helping people without whining about it or, feeling like he's being told to do that stuff. Like, one of my favorite parts about the show was when Peter had stopped a criminal from robbing a bodega, and not just doing that, but giving the robber a second chance because he had hoped that the lady did not want to do that. And I feel like we don't see enough of that from Spider-Man, and especially from the MCU. But his attitude and how he acts is something I'm not really a fan. I am not the fan of this new Peter that's been happening, of him just being a very sweet, adorable, no, can't do anything wrong nerd. Peter has not really been like that in the main comics. And yes, I know a lot of people are going to say, but don't you like the Tobey Maguire version? Well, yes, that was my first interpretation of Spider-Man, but I understand that was his own thing, and he wasn't overly nerdy and overly clumsy. He still felt like he had a lot of problems that he needed to get through. It's not the only thing that I don't like about this version of Spider-Man. It's just something that I notice a lot. They overdid it in this show of him being very awkward, very nice, very sweet, and he can't be unlikable. I just wanted to point that out. The main reason why I'm like really weirded out is because he acts like Spider-Man, because he does all this stuff. His origin doesn't make any sense to me. Because you know how I said that his whole origin is the time loop? That stuff normally I'd be fine with because, you know, I've seen stories like that. It's like, oh, okay, so he basically created himself and it's a time loop, right? But the main thing that irks me is that there was no reason for him to truly be Spider-Man. Because Uncle Ben never was the reason Peter became Spider-Man. And in the beginning, we knew that. I didn't really mention it because I knew that people are going to say, but don't you like this version? Don't you like that version? I've already explained I do like changes. But I feel like taking away this takes away a lot of who Spider-Man's supposed to be in his entirety. Because the creator had said that he wanted to make it that Peter didn't need Uncle Ben to die to become Spider-Man because he said that, oh, instead of one event causing Peter to be in Spider-Man, his uncle's lessons actually sunk in with him for his entire life. The reason I don't really like that is because in the comics, in multiple interpretations, it has said that Peter did understand that Uncle Ben has said with great power comes great responsibility multiple times. That wasn't the only time he said it, you know, when he was dying or, you know, beforehand. It was just at that point he was a kid. He's going to be selfish and his death is his point of growing up. That's why a lot of stories, and especially with superheroes, it's the superhero's parents die because it's that evolution of someone being a kid to being an adult, of losing people. And I felt like that was a stronger Spider-Man of him growing up and that him being selfish is the reason why he does everything he does. Yes, later on it is because he's just a good person, but in the back of his mind, it's because he couldn't do something for his family and now he has to live with that. And so he tries to save everyone. And this Spider-Man does that. This Spider-Man does everything he's supposed to be. That's why he refuses Norman Osborn. He says, I don't want anyone else to get hurt. I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want to be the cause of any more harm. And I'm like, that is Spider-Man. But why? What is the point of Spider-Man being this way? And I get it. A lot of other heroes don't need someone to die to be a hero. But for this, it was a push that allowed Peter to be a hero. And I think that also goes into the fact that Peter is way too nice nowadays. And it's like, what will be the point of Uncle Ben if Peter's not going to be a little shit? So I kind of understand the removal, but it, again, takes away a lot of the urgency on why Peter does everything he does. But that's just me. I still like a lot of this show, but that's a big one that I can't get past from. I tried to, but every time he did something Spider-Man, every time he did something that you're like, okay, it's because of Uncle Ben. But in this version, it wasn't. Yes, Aunt May is there, and I love Aunt May in this version, but it didn't really feel like that she's the reason why he's Spider-Man at all. Now, even though I said that I'm not really happy that they didn't make Uncle Ben part of Peter's origin, I did like the fact that he was actually talked about and shown as much as possible. And then, you know, I said that the creator said he did this whole new origin for Peter because Uncle Ben's lessons actually hit him and actually made him want to be a hero. Doesn't make too much sense when in this show, to show Norman Osborn as being really kind of manipulative is by reversing the words, with great power comes great responsibility, with great power comes great respect. So I'm like, so did he never actually get the specific words? And I get it, it's supposed to make Norman look bad, but that just makes me really confused. But that's just me. And I know someone's gonna say, oh, so you don't like changes. No, I do like changes. I have said multiple times in this videos, I do like a lot of the changes they did here. Like a big one they did here of making Richard Parker being alive and being in prison. That was cool. And that makes me curious for the next season. The reason why I'm okay with it is because it doesn't completely shift who Spider-Man is. And they also did that in the past with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 as a deleted scene. I personally really love the show. There are still things that I was worried about and that I'm not going to be excited for in the next season. But overall, I am still very excited. But what do you think? Did you like the show? Did you like all the changes? I know this is an Elseworld type thing, but it was weird for me for origin-wise. But did you like that? Did you like that Peter's origin was completely shifted? Please let me know all your opinions in the comments down below. But if there's nothing else, this has been Doodlebite. I hope everyone stays nerdy, and I hope to see everyone in the next video. Bye!